right, well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome in truly coast to coast today for another exciting Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants broadcast. I know we've got a lot of familiar faces in the crowd, but we do have a new speaker and some new classes as well. So if you are joining us for the first time, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And you're catching us in a really exciting day because we are smack dab in the middle of like our biggest, most epic week ever. I think we've got 30 programs this week alone, which is insane. It's been a really wild ride today alone. Joe Deturi from the bottom of the ocean, right whales. We just wrapped up with Clean Air and Environment Canada. We did live from Halifax Beach with sharks. It's been insane. They're all on our YouTube channel, so please head there, check out all the stuff we've got on the go. There's so much to learn and discover. Particularly today, I'm excited because we are continuing our epic Environment Week in conjunction with some really amazing scientists coast to coast to coast across Canada, featuring everything from polar knowledge to clean air, climate, wildfires with Jasper yesterday, and more. It has been so exciting, and a big thank you to all our friends for making this possible at the Government of Canada. Now, I'm so excited today because we are welcoming in for the first time Dr. Lauren Erland, and she is going to talk to us today about plants responding to smoke signals and plant intelligence, reacting to wildfires. This is a topic that really, when I was a boy, we did not talk about plants communicating. That was just not something that was mentioned maybe in like obscure science journals. And now it is big news. There are major books, publications, DVD series, and more highlighting this incredible new research. And I'm so glad you get to join me today in our Environment Week to learn a little more about it. She also, as I bring her in, and welcome in, Lauren, you have the coolest job ever, Canada Research Chair in BERRi Horticulture, which just sounds delicious and wonderful. And like, I cannot wait for you to blow our minds and take us away on a little bit of a journey together. So I will zip my lip and welcome to the program and take us away.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. And yes, I think my rule is we only work on things that taste good, though we won't talk about too many berries today, unfortunately, or fortunately, maybe. So does that look okay, Jesse?
You are golden. It couldn't be better.
Okay, so I'm super excited to be here today. And I guess my first question before we even get started is, do you think that plants can see, hear, or perceive smoke signals? Does anyone have a guess of where this is going to go?
Yes, Mr. Shatterthought, if you guys want to chime in, YouTubers, by all means, chime in there too. I think our early answers are yes. 10 that say yes in the class. Yes, because of the topic. I think if they didn't, we might not be here today.
Excellent. I will take that. So we're all bought into this then. And so I want to start by acknowledging that being a plant is actually really hard. So if we think about what does a plant do in their daily lives, they're kind of just stuck there and they're forced to deal with whatever's in their environment around them. And we also know, especially with the theme this week, that it's getting harder to be a plant because our environments are starting to do crazy things. They're changing and they're getting way more extreme. So a plant that maybe used to be able to just like sit there and have a pretty predictable summer, pretty predictable winter, is now having all sorts of crazy things thrown at it. So if we want our plants to continue to survive in our ecosystems and our delicious berries and all the beautiful flowers and all of that, the plants are going to need to be able to kind of understand what's going around them. Plants have to be smart. They have to be able to look around and say, okay, this thing is happening, and now I'm going to change how I am responding in some way. And so the way that plants can do this, first is they have to sense what's happening, and then they have to make a decision and change the way they're growing. So that means there's two parts to this. And part one is the sensing. So does anyone want to take a guess at how many senses a plant have? We know we've got 5 or maybe 6 if you're my age. How many senses do you think a plant has?
Let's see. We'll head to our YouTube and StreamYard audiences again. Anything you want to chime in? There's really there's no bad answers here. This is not an obvious question. Jace says 5 like us. Miss Cork's class on YouTube. What do we think? Let's get more. Lots of 8s. So we're just going bigger. We don't quite know why, but we're going a little more than what humans have. I honestly, as a person who's done a lot of plant stuff, I don't know what answer we're going with this at all. This is very exciting for me. 4 senses, 2, so all over the place. Lauren, tell us.
Okay, more. No one went for the Price is Right answer and went for 1, hey?
No one this time, unfortunately. No, they tried to concretely give us an answer. It's very exciting.
I like it. I like the enthusiasm. So when we as plant scientists think about plant senses, we actually call these tropisms. So I maybe should have given that hint to everyone before, because you've maybe heard about phototropism, which is how plants move towards the light. And if any of you have tried to grow plants at home that have been in kind of a shady window, you've probably seen this before, because they'll stretch out and they'll try to reach towards that light. But the actual answer, and I'll be honest and say that we probably don't have a solid single answer to this, because scientists are learning new things all the time. And sometimes scientists like to argue with each other about if something is really distinct from something else. But here's my list. And the answer, according to this list, would be 17 different senses. So plants can sense things like lightness, darkness, the magnetic field, gravity, touch, sound, electrical waves. So plants are actually really, really perceptive organisms. And I might argue a lot more perceptive than we are. And one really, really cool example that I think we're all familiar with this is things like mimosa plants or carnivorous plants are a really good example of how plants can have really, really rapid responses, even though we think of them in our minds as just stationary. So this is a YouTube video of a Venus flytrap. So this is just one trap of the Venus flytrap, and you can see sort of in this preview, there's two little dots, and these are called trigger hairs. So these are little plant sensory organs that when a fly gets trapped in there and it starts thrashing around, these little tiny hairs will get triggered, and that causes the plants to have an actual, like almost the equivalent of a nerve firing of people. So let's have a look at it. It starts really dark, and you see they touch it once, no movement on the trap. Now they touch it a second time, all of a sudden trap starts to close. And you see right before the trap starts to close, and each time that's triggered, you see this bright green kind of flash of light. And that flash of light is actually a calcium signal that triggers something else down the line that we're going to talk about in a minute. So let's just watch it one more time because it's so incredibly cool, I think. So you can see it starts all dark. The plant's just in resting mode. It's like just a resting neuron in a human brain. We hit it once, nothing happens. We're waiting, the anticipation. We hit it again, and it closes. And so this is actually really interesting because sometimes things can fall just into a trap, and they don't want to be closing all the time if it's not something that they can actually eat or digest. So they're making a really smart decision to wait until they know something's in there. There's a fly that's kind of walking around. Then they choose to use the energy to actually close that trap and start digesting them. If you actually mess around with Venus flytraps too much, what you'll actually find is you'll kill the traps if you keep triggering them without anything in there to eat, because it's actually really expensive for them in terms of energy to do that closing action. So plants, we now know they're really important in how they sense their environment. They need to know what's going on so they can make a decision. And then we know they can have very quick or very slow responses. And so how do they make those responses? Plants are really, really good chemists. So they use chemicals to respond to their environment. And in some cases, they can also use them to sense those changes. And that's what we'll talk about in a minute. And the big group of chemicals that do this that I'm super excited about are actually plant hormones or phytohormones. So we all know that we have hormones, we have neurotransmitters in our brains. We've got epinephrine, dopamine, melatonin, serotonin. Plants have all those same molecules. So plants make melatonin, plants make adrenaline, and they do the same thing, which is they just act as signals. They move through the organism and they say, start this process now because we saw this thing that happened. And so the really boring way to explain this in plants is we think about this in terms of two big groups, and it doesn't matter what they are, but we can say one of them makes roots, one of them makes shoots. And if you shift around this balance, you can make plants do all sorts of crazy things. So you could, for example, take a single cell from a flower petal and actually make that turn into a whole new plant with roots and shoots and everything without ever having to go through a seed or do any kind of plant growth. So I said that auxins and cytokines are kind of boring. What do I work on? I like all the crazy different things like melatonin, things like serotonin, or things that actually are produced by our environment. So this is where we get to our smoke signals. So when you think of how a fire impacts plants, what do you think of? What comes to mind if you think about fire and plants? Does anyone have any initial thoughts?
Ooh, this is interesting. We had this exact same question in our Jasper talk the other day, so I'm really curious where this different audience takes this. Again, YouTubers, StreamYard classes, do chime in. Let's see what we've got. They burn down, so fire kills plants. That's our first obvious thing. Certainly, I when I'm
I can't disagree.
Yeah. Anyone else want to chime in? Pine needles. Oh, interesting. Pine needles make like an explosion. So fire kills plants, and some things really go up in flames in an exciting way. Burning harms, so all bad. Make the fire get larger. So there's our take so far, Lauren.
Okay. Well, I like where everyone is going with this, and it's almost like I bribed someone in this audience to feed me the answers I was looking for. So excellent. Thank you very much to the audience. So one of the things that we didn't mention, but I actually find if I'm talking to scientists, they often come up with is that it opens up cones of pine cones. So you hear a lot about, if we're thinking about good things that fire does, it can open up pine cones. You're absolutely right. It often kills plants. It clears out an ecosystem. In some cases, that can be useful because it can kind of open up old vegetation, burn off a bunch of debris, and kind of encourage some new growth. If we've got something like this fire in the background here that I'm showing you that was quite severe, it can actually do really crazy things, and it can like tar the ground and be really bad. But fire is not always bad. And in a lot of cases, a little bit of fire can be really, really regenerative for an ecosystem. It can be a really positive thing. And so it sounds like there was a great talk about at Jasper Park the other day all about this. Today, though, we're not actually going to think about fire. We're going to think about the other thing that comes with fire, which is smoke. And whoever said pine needles is 100% on the money with this one. So when we have a fire, we have basically chemical conversions. We have a combustion reaction that's making smoke. And as part of that reaction, what we actually get is wildfires producing plant hormones. So all cell walls are made up of cellulose. And when this big chunky molecule burns, it turns into a whole bunch of little tiny molecules that are called kerikins, which is actually a word that is from an Australian Aboriginal word called kerik, which means smoke. And so these were first discovered in Australia, who are no strangers to wildfires. And what we see with these kerikins is that they can actually do things like promote plant germination after a fire. And so they're this kind of magical thing that when we have a wildfire, we have all this smoke that's produced. And even plants that are kilometers away from where that wildfire is can actually sense that smoke and start to make decisions about having, I want to grow now. And so what we saw in the Okanagan, which is where I grew up, was we had a few really big fire years, and we saw certain types of plants and certain types of flowers that started to really start blooming and growing lots more after we had these wildfires, even though they were nowhere near the fire. All they saw was the smoke. And so these growth regulators are really cool because they're also really similar to the same hormones that parasitic plants use. So parasitic plants use a special type of hormones called strigolactones. You don't need to know those names, but that's what they use to kind of invade their host plants and let them kind of take nutrients from them. So you've got wildfires, burning pine needles, creating these things that are the same type of signals that parasitic plants use. And then you've got all your plants in your ecosystem that can react to it. So this is an example of mistletoes, I think one of the best known parasitic plants. Giant red paintbrush is in the middle. This is one of my favorite plants when I'm out kind of wandering around. And then this is a little tiny broom rape on the side here. These two pictures on the bottom are actually plants we saw coming up after wildfires. So the way that plants use these can be really complicated, and it can be really different depending on the species. But if you think about being a plant, so we're a plant, and we're experiencing a big fire. So we might just die, but we might also have made seeds for that year. and we maybe dropped our seeds in the soil and there's a big fire, and now you have an opportunity. All your competitors are gone. They've been burnt. They've been killed by the fire. There's lots of open space now. Wildfires usually happen in summertime. If we think about when a plant wants to grow, if we've got the fire burns down, okay, maybe it's September, October, the fire is stopped. There's lots of open space. Do I want to start germinating yet? Probably not, because the next thing that's going to happen is winter. And winter is also a really great way to get killed if you're a little tiny plant. And so what these hormones do is the plant goes and it makes a calculation. It says, okay, I see this much of these keratin hormones. I can see this much of the smoke has happened. I know the heat from the fire is gone now, but I really think I need to have cold first, because if there's no cold, then I might get killed in the winter. So what plants will do is they'll say, okay, I need this much of the smoke plus this much of cold, and then I'm going to grow. Or they might say, in this case, I need to have this many winters because I know all the plants are going to try and grow all at once. I don't want that competition. I'm going to wait till 3 winters and then I'm going to grow. And depending on what plant you are, you'll make different decisions. You can also make different decisions depending on how much smoke and how much fire there is. So if you have a little tiny bit of fire, so this is kind of like this picture shows a site that we've been working at on this project with BC Parks. So this is at Skaha Bluffs Provincial Park, just south of Okanagan in Silks Okanagan Nation territory, where they had the fire that I was actually showing the pictures of, the Christie Mountain fire in 2020. This is 2 years after the fire. This is an area that kind of had a low intensity burn, something that would be more akin to a cultural burn or a management style burn that can kind of regenerate the ecosystem. And we can go in and we can look and we can see which plants are coming up when. And are those plants changing if you have a really, really bad fire, really severe fire that turns everything into kind of little tree toothpicks and just kills everything, like someone said at the beginning? Or is it something that is just a little bit of a burn and maybe it makes things better? And so how we do this is we go out and we count plants. So for example, we can use this little grid here. We go out and we get to spend all day hiking all over mountains and counting plants and seeing what types of plants are there. Are things like those parasitic plants actually having a different response to that fire, maybe because of these chemicals? We can also look at places that didn't have any fire. So this is an example of one of the flowers that we found that increased in number with just smoke exposure, so no fire at all. So this is the Okanagan sunflower or balsam root. My mom always jokes, I actually bring my mom out sometimes with me to help with my field surveys, because moms are the best and they often do whatever you ask them to do. But she always jokes that when she sees this one, it means the snakes are out, because they come out at the same time that all the snakes come out of their dens. And so we see changes in things like the number of these flowers that are present. We can also measure them using transect lines if we've got bigger areas. So we'll put down one of these orange ropes. I know it's very, very highly technical. And then we count all of the plants that come along this line. Or one of the other things we can do is we can actually go and measure the amount of these hormones that are in the soil. So we can go, we take a little cork bore, we go along our line, we take samples and we measure how much after 1 year, how much after 2 years, how much after 3 years of these hormones are kind of left in the soil if there was a fire or if there was no fire. And then we go into the lab. So I love being outside, but the lab is really fun too. And we can say, okay, we know that there is, after 1 year, this amount of these hormones in the soil. After 2 years, we have this amount. And after 3 years, we have this amount. And it's probably going down. And so we can test those different concentrations and say, at what concentration do our seeds start to germinate? And what you find is, depending on what species you kind of have a sweet spot where the plants are waiting for their little chemical clock to tick by as the kind of hormones wash out of the soil or they get broken down by other kind of microorganisms that are present. And once they hit the magical number, the plants will start to germinate. They'll start to grow. And it's kind of like this crazy magic clock that the plants have, that they're just waiting to see what this happens. And so we're really curious at Skaha Bluffs, for example, if we have plants that kind of co-evolved in a fire-adapted ecosystem, plants that have kind of grown up with fire, expect to see fire, do they respond to these hormones? Are they smarter about understanding these smoke signals than plants that are an invasive species or an introduced species that didn't grow up with them? that hasn't evolved with them. And so this is some of the work that we've been working on. This is an example of what we can kind of see. So on the left-hand side, this is cheatgrass. If you've never run into cheatgrass before, you are very lucky. It will get in all of your socks and all of your boots, and it will never go away. It is very effective at spreading its seeds, but it can really cover ecosystems. So, if we have a really high severity fire that kills everything, this creates an opportunity for these invasive species to move in and replace things like our bunchgrass prairies that at Scott Bluffs, for example, is really important to the bighorn sheep and the mule deer and these kind of unique ecosystems where, it's supporting at-risk and endangered species. And so we're starting to learn more about how different plants can read these smoke signals and how that can change how they respond. What are kind of those time points that they're waiting to see? And how do the plants make those decisions? And kind of the overall goal is to ask, how can we understand how plants understand their ecosystems so that we can help support or plan for what's going to happen as our climates start to change more? Because unfortunately, I think we all know that we're seeing things that are different. So I think at the end, I think the take home I'd like everyone to know is that, yes, some plants can read smoke signals, but maybe not all of them, and we still have a lot to learn about it. So we should all get out in the field.
No better message than that, Lauren. And if you want to come out of screen share now to see us again, have a bit of a chat, that was magnificent. What cool research you get to do, my goodness.
It's the best.
It is the best. This is the joy of this job, is that I get to work with people in all manner of fields, and everyone is so keen on the work that they do. The one sort of unifying factor of science globally, whether it's biology, astronomy, whatever, is that everyone loves their jobs. We get to work with incredible people from around the globe. We get to, answer questions in our job and solve puzzles. We get to share that wildly with people and get them all excited about it too. If there's a better gig than this, I don't know what it is. And lucky you to be in one of the truly special places of the world, the University of Fraser Valley. That is a gorgeous place to take a train through for our Canadian friends that ever want to go across the country. You pass right by there, and it is lovely.
10 out of 10 would recommend if you like hiking.
Yeah. I'm on my way. I'm in Newfoundland right now, which means I'm actually closer to Morocco than I am to you, which sort of is a testament to how big our country is. And it's a lot of fun every time.
Amazing.
Lauren, I told our classes that I was going to try and come up with a Kahoot in the middle of the broadcast, and I managed to pull it off. So Mr. Shadow's class, Miss Cork, all the rest of our YouTube friends, if you guys want to join in with that game pin, we are going to do a little 4-question quiz together, test some understanding, have some fun. And what you win is Lauren and I's everlasting respect. So I think that's pretty cool. Lauren, if you want to help us out with some answers and give little nods and hints in our final few seconds here, we'd love to have you help us out. Awesome. And it's your first time, so have some fun with us. And let's dive in with question number 1. Then we're going to all our classes for question and answer. All right. Question 1 coming in 1 more second. True or false? Plants can communicate. I hope this is firmly established, but we'll find out in mere seconds. 18 of you have your answers in so far. We went in maybe thinking plants were dullards. They have no way of telling each other anything. Maybe we've learned that might not be true. Yet 22, that has never happened. Everyone says yes. You are the first ever, Lauren, ever in 500 of these to have got 100% uptake on your message. Way to go.
They all have my everlasting respect. There's no way anyone cannot.
Question 2, our quiz. Plants have how many tropisms or senses? Tropism is your science word of the day. Is it 2, 5, 10, or over 15? Maybe with some ambiguity in case you discover more. I've always liked the little, what are they called? Statolith? The little things that allow them to tell where things are gravitationally.
Yes.
Yes. It's very fun.
Yeah, they have starch granules.
You guys are killing it today. Way to go, Cahooters, you guys. Yes, over 15. We're at 17, 18, 17 and counting.
17 and counting.
17 and counting. Cool. We'll keep doing some experiments and find out more. True or false? Venus flytraps need to be touched on only 1 trigger hair to fire. Now, the video where you actually have the fluorescent protein and you're checking that out is amazing, but I can attest, doing this in person is so wild because you can know it's going to happen, but to actually see it and witness it, it's like my astronomy version of seeing Saturn's rings for the first time through a telescope, and that was mind-blowing because it's just like a line through a dot. But touching a Venus flytrap's little trigger hairs, Oh, we messed people up on this one. So yes, Lauren, as you said, if a leaf were to fall and hit a Venus flytrap hair, it doesn't behoove the Venus flytrap to close every time that happens. So it's got this system where it needs to have two hairs touched. That's representative of a creature sort of moving around for it to snap shut. It's very cool. Out of curiosity, and I'm so sorry if you said this, what is the time limit on that? So you've touched one hair. Is there a set amount of time before?
There is. Plants have a set amount of time, and I'm not sure off the top of my head what the cutoff is, but it's fairly short. It needs to be within a fairly close amount of time, and what you're looking for is that green wave that you saw.
Yes.
Needs to not dissipate. Like, it needs to have the green wave still there when you hit it a second time. So everyone should go to their local plant nursery and start touching all the Venus flytraps and see what happens.
I think
don't tell them I sent you.
Lauren, you might have a cooler plant nursery than me. I've never seen one live. If I ever see one in any nursery, it's going to be in my house so fast it'll make your head spin. I've always wanted to own one. Also, a second Kahoot weird thing. This is literally the first ever dead even tie that I've seen going into the final question. So let's see what happens. True or false? Fire is universally harmful to plants. We all thought it was about burning before. What do we?
I did like the explosions. The explosions was a cool take.
A nice touch.
Yeah.
By the way, on YouTube, you're having an impact. So our comment is: plants seem to have figured out a really smart way to survive. They sure have. Plants rock. They've been around the block a few times. We miss people up on this too. So how have you done it? So it's false. Fire can be useful to plants. There are some plants that actually require fire to complete their life cycle. So it is not universally harmful. Let's see what that does to our leaderboard. Okay. Third place, space crab, which is inexplicably a skull and glasses. Second place, Jolly Rabbit. And so, number one is Shining Gator. Okay, cool, guys. If you are any of these folks, let us know who you are in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. Kudos on the Kahoot. Everlasting respect bestowed. And we are going to dive in with our Q&A. So, I'm going to head to YouTube first. Mr. Shattuck, you guys can get your sort of thoughts already. Ms. Cork wants to know, when did scientists discover that plants can communicate? How long has this knowledge been around?
I love this question. This is such a cool question, and the answer is super unexpected. So I think there's two answers to this. So one, if we think about traditional knowledge, and we think about a lot of our indigenous cultures, they've actually known that plants are communicating for a very long time. And so using things like cultural burns is one way that they've seen that. In Western science, and kind of our more what we would call hard sciences, the first person who really documented this is Charles Darwin, who seems to have done everything. And so that was back in the late 1800s, where they actually documented things like movement towards light in a book called The Power of Movement in Plants. And so if you like a good history lesson, go and look up Power of Movement in Plants. There's some really cool figures from back then.
This is so interesting because I'm a big Darwin buff, and I actually did not know this about him. I think of him with coral, I think of him with worms, I think of him with barnacles, but not plant studies. So that is very cool. So Darwin's on the scene from the early to late 1800s, which sounds like a long time ago for you students, but is actually shockingly recent. So there you are.
Well, and it's one of the things that Darwin got called truly crazy for, and his son actually picked it up after him. So it's one of his fringe ideas that actually ended up being true, which is kind of fun.
Way to go, Charles. Mr. Shadowcross, we're going to head to Deep River. Come on in 5-6s and take us away. Hey.
Why do plants need melatonin if they don't sleep?
Ooh.
Oh, I love that question. So when scientists first found out that plants had melatonin, they really, really wanted to think that plants would use it for telling what it's night and day, but they don't actually. Plants use it to survive stress. So this is actually kind of the same way that humans can use melatonin too. It's mostly for sleep, but we can also, when we get really, really stressed, melatonin can help us too. And plants use it in that way instead of in helping them sleep. So that's a really good question and a really hard question for scientists to answer. So
seriously, we've never had that one. I can tell you that has never been asked in the history of Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, and I've done these for 8 years. So very cool question, guys. We're going to take one from online. I figured we'd get this one. What is your favorite plant? No pressure at all. Go.
Oh no. You know what? I think one of the coolest plants, and this is gonna be controversial because it's not a berry plant, but willows are actually really cool because they grow really, really fast and they can change how they grow really dramatically. So if you go see a willow tree up north of the Arctic Circle, it'll look like a little shrub growing along the ground, but you can also have willow trees that are super, super tall. Here kind of in southern Canada or in Ontario. So I think willows are really, really cool because they're so adaptive to their environments. But don't tell the berry plants because I'll get in trouble.
I was going to say, I think you're going to be hauled before a panel pretty soon for this. We can erase it from YouTube so that it's never reached the light of day. I love willows. You're the first person to mention willows in a long time here too. All right. Quick question from our online audience as well. And then we're going back live with Mr. Shattuck. Who do you get to work with in your work? One of the things I like this question because in a lot of science disciplines, people get to work with collaborators from all over the world. It's one of the cool things about science. Anything you can speak to about the places you've gotten the chance to go, who you've gotten to work with? Tell us more.
Yeah, I'm so fortunate to have been able to work with and learn from a lot of different collaborators all over the place. So this project in particular, we got to work with BC Parks ecologists, BC Parks staff. So they're the ones who manage the parks. They know all about them. We also had the chance to work with knowledge keepers and elders at Silks Okanagan Nation. So that brings in this Indigenous perspective and knowledge, which really predates any Western knowledge of kind of fire ecology or fire restoration practices. So that was a really, really cool aspect of this project. In terms of other cool places I've gotten to do work, probably the coolest place I've gotten to travel to is Resolute or Kowsweetuk, which is up on the Northwest Passage. To look at how plants are responding there. So there's lots of willows up there doing crazy things, for example. So that's probably the coolest place I've gotten to go.
Thank you for choosing a place that isn't just, figuratively cool, but it's literally cool as well, being up in Resolute. We actually have another Arctic scientist who's going up there fairly soon, tomorrow. So if you're keen on Arctic stuff, come join us. We've done some great Arctic botany programs in the past with a guy named Paul Sokoloff as well.
Oh, Paul does crazy good work.
Cool. See, the small world of science. There you go.
Yes.
Mr. Shattuck, we're heading back to you guys. Come on in. Take us away.
Have you ever wanted to study some underwater plants?
Ooh, I love that question. And the answer is totally yes. So there's this one cool plant that I'm kind of obsessed with. And if any of you have aquariums at home, maybe you have it, but it's called a lace plant. And if you look at the leaves, it grows in streams, flowing streams, and the leaves have holes in them. It looks like almost like lace or like a screen door mesh. And it's got really, really consistent patterns of holes in the leaves. And one of the things we don't understand is how plants choose to make holes or why they make them, and kind of how that happens in such a perfectly regular way, because they don't start that way. They start as solid leaves. And then they intentionally kill some of their cells to make those holes. So I think that that's just like so crazy that plants are choosing to have less leaf and make holes in them when usually that's a bad thing. So yes, totally.
So I'm going to get a screenshot of this that I can bring up in a second so our students can see it. They're so cool. I've never seen plants like this. What they remind me of is sort of like, you'll have signs up in mountainous areas or really windy areas, and people will intentionally cut holes in them so that they don't make enough of a thing to be blown away. I would wonder if that has any element to it. That is so cool. What a neat group of plants. Wow. So yes, I'll bring up a picture in a second. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to share this great question from Ms. Corkscrew. You mentioned returning to sites year after year. How long do plant scientists study an area for?
Ooh, also really good question. And you know what? I'm going to have to admit that there is not a good single answer for this. So depending on what a scientist is trying to understand, they might return to the same site for their whole career, or they might just go back for a couple years, or sometimes you can even do something like, in BC, which is where I am, we've got tons and tons of wildfires that have been happening for the last century. So we could even go to wildfires that happened 50 years ago, 60 years ago, 70 years ago, and just do one summer, but go to kind of historically places that have burned at different times and kind of mimic that as well. So there's not a good answer to it, except for it depends on what the scientist is trying to ask. For us, we did 2 years post-fire. And then we're going to go back and do 5 years after the fire as well. But I'll admit, because this park is right near where I grew up, I go and check on those plants all the time.
So nice. I was going to say, I'm got in the background because I'm bringing up the latest plant picture. There we are. So yes, they're very, very cool. Like, what a freaky plant. I love it. It's magnificent.
And they're one of the only plants that does this. The other plant, if anyone's a houseplant enthusiast, is Monstera plants. But they do not, like they're big philodendrons. They're very trendy if you're on like plant TikTok
Instagram.
or plant Instagram. Yeah. So
there you go. You can watch this back, students. If you want a plant that looks like that, listen to this later. Catch it on YouTube, and you can get the name of it and get your parents to buy it.
I want to see pictures of your plants.
The more the merrier. Send them all to us. We'd love to have them. It's our final home stretch here. So the more we can get students involved, the happier we all are. I was going to note on the scientist note, when I was in university as an ecology student, we had a scientist who for 40 years have been going back to the same forest to study figs. So like an entire career from like 20 on to near retirement, one plant, one little patch of forest. That can be your life, or you can do things all over the world. It really depends on the sort of science that you want to do. So we haven't got that question very much. This has been a very fun Q&A. Mr.
It's a really good question.
Seriously, this is the joy, Lauren, of this, is that kids ask everything as detailed as adults, but they have absolutely no filters. You never know what you're going to get. It's the joy of this job.
Awesome.
Mr. Shattuck, I thought we were going to have a third straight student with pigtails, which would have never happened before, but we do not. But welcome in. Hi.
If a plant is burnt up and is ash, can it still, seed, can it like still make a plant, or is it like can't do anything? It's just ash.
Ooh, really good question. You guys are just killing it today. So it depends on how deep that plant burns. So if the whole top of the plant, all the green stuff that you see gets burnt up and turned to ash, but everything under the ground is not burnt up, sometimes just the roots on their own can actually grow back and grow a new plant. But sometimes when fire is really, really, really hot, what happens is the whole top part gets burnt up, but it's still so hot that the roots underneath the ground will just keep burning. And so it's kind of like, it turns into this like weird underground fire that can follow all the root systems through. And in some cases it can, the fire can keep traveling that way, and it can just live underground for sometimes months, just burning up plant roots as like an underground fire.
We actually talked about this in our Jasper program the other day, and it's increasingly happening because the winters aren't enough to like sort of kill these underground fires. It sounds super weird. It's nothing that I thought existed when I was a kid, but literally fires that end up being big fires in the summer can be sprouted from these like long, many month smoldering fires underneath the ground, which is super freaky. So great question. And we were talking about Green Planet before we got underway with the broadcast. Planet Earth and BBC, their Grasslands episode, has a whole story, amazing featurette on burning grass, drowning grass. Like you can do anything to grass, and if you don't get to those deep roots, it will come back every single year. So very cool.
Yeah, plants are like magic. So
that should be like the slogan of the lab. Plants are like magic.
Yes.
Maybe it is. Lauren, time flies and you're having fun. We're nearing the end of our broadcast, so I'm going to bring in our live class, or one more to wrap us up, and then we will say farewell after that. Mr. Shattuck, come on in and take us away. Hey.
What is the biggest plant you have ever seen?
Ooh, wow, that's a really hard question. So I think, so if we think just like biggest, meaning like tallest, the old cedar trees on the BC West Coast and kind of those ancient cedar trees are probably the biggest trees that I've ever seen. But there are also lots of plants that can be really big, but they're not like tall. So you can have plants that cover like a huge amount of the ground. So if you go up to, when we were up in the Arctic, when we were around Chilliwack, there's lots of berry plants there, and they cover almost the whole ground. And it can be one plant that's kind of trailed off with runners and takes up a huge amount of area. So I'm going to go with either berry plants growing in mats or the big ancient cedar trees. And both of them are awesome. And ideally, if I could sit under a giant cedar tree and eat the berries that would be my ideal world. That sounds perfect.
I hope that happens for you. And I've been to those forests in BC. That's some of the most magical thing you can see in North America. For our American audience today, sequoias and California redwoods. So the far west coast of both Canada and the US are some of the biggest plants on planet Earth. In fact, a big sequoia can be about 10 times the size of a blue whale, which is the biggest animal ever to exist. So these are monstrous organisms. I like that you mentioned the plant sprawling. I've never actually thought of it quite that way. I know there's some fungi that can cover like many football fields, and it's one fungus that just keeps growing. So, Lauren, this has been so much fun. Before we wrap up, I just want to ask if there's any last message you want to leave our kids with before we bring in our live class to say thank you and farewell. Anything to leave us with today?
Well, I think like for me, the thing that I find most exciting is to see how excited you all are about plants, because, you know, plants aren't quite as flashy or as cute and cuddly as something like a polar bear or all our like cool mammals. So to see all of you excited about plants makes me really excited. And if the only thing you take home today is that plants are super smart, I would be super, super happy. And I'm just so glad that I could join you today.
We are going to title the next time we have you on for an episode, Plants Are Super Smart. We'll just stick with that. It'll be golden. Lauren, such a pleasure having you. Thank you so much. I'm going to bring in our class to say thank you and farewell. Mr. Shadish's class, scream and yell at home. Have a wonderful day, everyone.